The battle for Trump's taxes continue, now sitting in front of the Supreme Court. We've got several different briefs that we're going to go through today. Remember, this is about Trump wanting to stop the government from getting his taxes. They've wanted his taxes for a long time. They filed all sorts of different suits all over the place in different parts of the country. But now that Donald Trump is no longer the president, the House Ways and Means Committee is saying, oh, perfect. Now it's time to get our grubby little fingers on Trump's taxes. And now that Donald Trump has even announced he's running for president, boy, oh boy, you can imagine they really want this stuff and they want it bad, baby. So we have to get an update. Now, remember that this is in front of the Supreme Court. And so this is kind of the final stop here for this litigation. And this is a new situation because Donald Trump is no longer in office. And he filed an application for a stay submitted to the Chief Justice back on October 31st. And we covered that, right? We read through the whole thing and they said, Supreme Court here, we've got a separation of powers problem here. We've got an executive privilege problem here. We've got all sorts of issues with the legislative branch being able to come in, which is a co-equal branch of government, by the way, and just sort of running roughshod over the executive branch. Right? We don't want the president to run roughshod over Congress, just like we don't want Congress to run roughshod over the executive branch. And so it's this little problem. And so we are now, the way this worked, Trump won a prohibition on the documents being transferred from the IRS over to the House Ways and Means Committee. Trump won at the lowest level court. They took that up on appeal, and the DC Circuit Court of Appeals said, oh, Trump, sorry, you're a loser. You lose now. And so they said to the IRS, go ahead and start packing up all the paperwork, get that over to Trump, or get that over to the House Ways and Means Committee as soon as you can. Trump, that same basically day, they filed an application for a stay. They said, Judge, hold on a minute. Stop that Court of Appeals from sending those documents back over to the IRS or the IRS sending the documents over to the House Ways and Means Committee. And on November 1st, the Supreme Court came out and they said, okay, well, we heard you, Trump. They said, all right, it is now ordered that the United States District Court of Appeals for DC, it's ordered stayed pending further development from the Supreme Court. And then we got the response. So these are the items that we're going to go through today. A response filed by the United States and a response filed by the House Ways and Means Committee, right? Congress is actually, they have got their own lawyers that they're drafting responses, for this case. And so we're not going to look at the United States filing. We're going to look at the Ways and Means Committee's filing. They're saying, hey, judges at the Supreme Court, we're entitled to Trump's taxes. I mean, we should get these things. And then we're going to look at Trump's actual reply. And this is where, Trump is saying there's absolutely no reason why they should have my taxes. And the way this works, again, there's an original filing, which is Trump. Trump submitted the original document to the Supreme Court. Government responds, and then Trump gets the final word. So we're going to go through all of that. We've got two documents here that are going to detail everything for us. But before we jump right into the actual filing, I have to tell you about our friends over at 4 Patriots Survival Food. As you know, there could be a food shortage coming. Experts are saying this might happen as recently as July. There's drought, there's inflation, there's new policies. Food supply is really near a breaking point. That's why survival food is more important now than ever. Create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriots survival food kits. This is not ordinary survival food. This is good for 25 years super survival food, hand-packed by family-owned businesses right here in the United States, giving jobs to over 300 Americans. These kits are sturdy, they're water-resistant, they stack very easily. There's different delicious meals, breakfast, lunches, and dinners. You can make them in less than 20 minutes. All you've got to do is add boiling water, simmer, and serve. And now you can get this amazing 3-month food survival kit. You get a freshness guarantee for the entire year after you submit an order. You can go to 4patriots.com, use promo code Robert to get 10% off. You get free shipping on any orders over $97. This company is called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale goes to charities that support our veterans and their families. And so please, my friends, go to 4patriots.com, use code Robert, and get your stockpile today. All right, so let's get into the actual filings that are hitting at the Supreme Court. Filed by the government, the House of Representatives, the Committee on Ways and Means, they are opposing Donald Trump's emergency application to stop the government from giving their committee Trump's taxes. The government says, we want these taxes. Trump tried to stop us from getting them. They're telling the Supreme Court we're opposing Trump's actions. You can see a bunch of lawyers signed off on this from various locations, all coming out of the United States House of Representatives. We've got a big table of authority, and this document is 52 pages. So we're just going to hit some of the introductory language, and then we'll jump into some of the responses. But we've got our table of authorities, the Ways and Means Committee. They're going to tell us we've got authority to do all of this stuff. They give us the IRS procedures. They talk about 2019, 2021 requests and all of those different things. But once we get to the actual introduction, we see this is why the government thinks that they are entitled to the records. They write, for more than 3 years, very irritated they are, the House of Representatives has been considering legislative proposals and conducting oversight related to whether the IRS can take the tax records of former presidents. Concerns about the IRS's ability to do this, they're not entirely new. They say in the early 1970s, a congressional investigation revealed that the IRS had kind of screwed up with Richard Nixon's taxes, and they prompted the IRS to adopt a policy that says that the president's and vice president's annual tax returns will be subject to mandatory audit. Okay, the IRS said, this is our policy now. We're just going to go in and investigate presidents if we want to. They write, former President Donald Trump's term in office raised similar concerns, and in fact, it amplified them. Unlike his predecessors, Mr. Trump owned a complex web of businesses, engaged in business activities internationally, had a history, as they say, of aggressive tax avoidance, as he even boasted, right? I don't pay taxes, he said. Claimed to be under continuous audit and has denounced the IRS as being unfair. And we love the IRS. We pay all our taxes here, all right? Just leave us alone. These substantial concerns prompted the chairman of the House Committee on the Ways and Means, Richard Neal, to begin an investigation of the IRS's mandatory presidential audit with respect to Trump's returns, which I'm sure was totally nonpartisan and apolitical, and not even any bias or animus towards Trump at all. And so in furtherance of that investigation, Chairman Neal exercised his authority under the law to request from the IRS the income tax returns of Mr. Trump, all the way back to 2015 to 2020, along with related returns from the IRS files. Guided by this court's precedent, including Trump versus Mazars, which was in 2020, the chairman request robustly articulated and documented the legislative need for the request. Now, this is an important phrase, right? A legislative purpose. Congress needs to do something legislatively, right, in order to have jurisdiction over these issues. Congress can't act like a grand jury. They can't act like a partisan political hack body like they have been acting like for the last 2 years and just go and decide, well, we're just going to go, well, we think we need Trump's tax records. Why? Because we can get them. No, not because you're curious and you want to leak them to the New York Times. You have to understand that there's a basis for them that's going to serve a legislative purpose. Like you're going to pass some law, you're going to do something that doesn't specifically single out Trump, because that would be a problematic law, right? It would be neutrally applied, facially neutral, and applied to the whole country. So they would be researching this, right? They're a big committee and why don't you come in here and all they do in Congress mostly is they just send letters and they just call people in to sit in front of them and lie to their faces. And so, they are saying that in order to do that, you got to have a legislative purpose. You just can't do it because you're bored and you hate Trump. So they said, well, guess what? We have done that here. Yes, in 2020, in Trump versus Mazars, you said we can't just be partisan hack Supreme Court. We have to have a legislative purpose. And so we've done that. We have actually said now that there is a legislative purpose. The request explained that the committee is examining the need for legislation on equitable tax administration, including on the president, and that we cannot properly evaluate the effectiveness of this program without access to Trump's returns. So they say, oh, well, we're just trying to regulate presidents in the future. He happens to be the most recent president, so we better start with him. What do you think? Treasury subsequently determined, they said, that they were obligated to give the information over because the Office of Legal Counsel, which is now, under Joe Biden, had said, yeah, no, give him the records. Perfect. Mr. Trump and his businesses, and those returns were requested. They turned around and they sought to stop the Treasury from complying with the request. They said, hold on a minute. We've got statutory protections. We've got constitutional claims here. that say that you can't get those documents. The district court rejected those claims across the board, dismissed the complaint. A panel of D.C. Circuit then affirmed, and then the Trump party's petitioned for a rehearing, and no judges recorded a dissent. Now, further review from the court is unwarranted, they're saying. So they're saying that Trump just took this all the way up to the Supreme Court. I might have gotten that procedural history wrong. I think we'll see. We'll see what Trump says. Further review from this court is unwarranted. So there's no net. So I guess let me clarify that. Procedural history is, I don't know exactly how it landed. I can't remember exactly how it landed in front of the Supreme Court. Whether he won at the lower level district court or whether he lost at the lower level district court, as they are to argue here. It's sort of inconsequential either way. They're at the Supreme Court. Further review from this court is unwarranted, writes the government, so there necessarily is no basis to issue the relief. The committee's request plainly serves a valid purpose. We said we're going to regulate the president. And Congress's power to obtain information is broad and indispensable. Longstanding precedent makes clear that we get access to these records. Now, they say the Trump party, so the Trump's team, says that this is unsettled and that the president's personal information here is just unavailable if it is a pretextual request. And so the criminal law analogy that we use all the time, right, is sometimes police will hang outside of like a marijuana dispensary and they'll, pull somebody over and they'll say, do you know why I stopped you? And you'll say, no, I don't know why. And they'll say, well, you made a wide right turn or you have a tail light out or something, right? The cops don't really care about a tail light or a wide right turn unless it's 2 a.m. Then they go, perfect. That's a great reason to stop you so they can get you for a DUI. Same thing here, right? They're not actually interested in legislating presidents. They're interested in getting Trump's tax records. But they say, but we have communicated a valid legislative purpose. We have communicated a license plate light. We've communicated a wide right turn. Therefore, it doesn't matter what you say. They say, as the Court of Appeals determined, the chairman's request from the House committee comports with constitutional principles of separation of powers under any proposed test, including the one that you announced, Supreme Court, previously. The Trump's parties, they say the lower court misapplied the decision in Mazars, and this was a rare error. But they're challenging the validity of the request. They say that none of that should be allowed. Therefore, they say the application should be denied, right? So in other words, Trump's request to stop the government from transferring the actual physical tax records from the IRS, Department of Treasury, over to the House. It's currently on hold. The government says lift the hold so that it can go back and continue forward. Now, the rest of this, right, it's a big filing. And if you want to go check it out, of course, you can go to the Supreme Court docket. All of this is publicly available. But let's go to the reply from Trump and his team, which is a little bit more interesting. And it's not quite as long. It is 16 pages. So I think we can get through the whole thing. In the Supreme Court of the United States, Donald Trump issues a reply in support of his original application to stop or to stay the transfer of documents from the IRS over to the House Ways and Means Committee, over to the Democrats. He's saying, Supreme Court, please stop this from happening. This is on application from the U.S. Court of Appeals in the D.C. Circuit. You see Trump's lawyers are Thomas McCarthy and others. We've got a short filing here, only about 12, 16 pages in total. Table of authorities, and they're replying to the government's response. The government is opposing demands the lift of the stay. Trump wants the stay to remain. Trump's lawyers write, constitutionally, Your Honors, the stakes could not be greater. No prior Congress has used its legislative power to obtain and expose the private financial information of a president. The last time Congress tried, this court entered a stay, granted review, and rejected Congress's assertion of authority 9-0, citing the case Trump versus Mazars. This court's intervention helped preserve the balance of power, forcing Congress to narrow its demands and jumpstarting the accommodation process. Among the unprecedented demands for Trump's taxes, however, this demand was always the worst, they write. No records have more, quote, intense political interest than Trump's tax returns. And no request was supported by more objective evidence of improper purpose, right? Not legislative purpose, political partisan hackery purpose. The evidence is so blatant that even before Mazars raised the legal standard, saying that you've got to have a legislative purpose to get this stuff, the executive branch rejected the committee's request for lacking a legitimate legislative purpose. That came from Senator Grassley, another letter. The committee was concluding the same. Yet the D.C. Circuit dismissed all that evidence as improper and a hunt for congressional motive, even under the now heightened standard. Because that test also governs sitting presidents, and because disputes usually arise in D.C., the decision below from the lower level court to force the records to go from the government to the House committee will force all presidents to fight abusive congressional demands for their personal information with two hands tied behind their back. If we just have to sit there as a president in the executive branch and just get these requests from some stupid committee member named Neil, he's just like, well, we just want your records, I guess. And what do you need them for? Oh, we're going to come up with legislation. Yeah, right. Nobody believes it. And the president is just going to sit there with his hands tied. I mean, Democrats out there, would you like this flipped around the other direction? You have Jim Jordan just sending letters to Joe Biden. Give me your taxes. Give me this. Give me that. Give me whatever you want. No, of course not. Meanwhile, Trump's team says the equities could not be more lopsided. Respondents don't disagree that absent a stay, President Trump will immediately and irretrievably lose his rights as a taxpayer to his privacy and judicial review. The government also doesn't identify any remotely comparable harm on their side. Okay, what happens if you don't get the tax records? If you do get them and you expose them all over the place, Trump has some harm, right? He actually has some privacy right violations. But if you don't get them, what is the harm to your legislative investigation, whatever it is you're doing? The executive, they say, has no legitimate interest in rapidly exposing the private finances of its former boss, and Congress has no pressing interest in studying how the IRS audits presidents. Even like, do we have a big problem? Is this a huge problem in Congress right now? Presidents aren't paying their taxes or something like that? The House Ways and Means Committee needs to really drop everything and investigate this. Even though the committee has access to reams of information about presidential audits now, including an eager IRS, it hasn't begun any serious legislative study. It remains singularly focused on getting the information of one particular president named Trump, whose audits aren't even finished yet. And all agree that should this court grant a stay and later deny cert or affirm, the committee is free to continue its investigation in the next Congress. However, the next Congress is not going to be Democratic anymore. And so this is going to have to be decided really quickly. And if it's decided before the balance of power changes, maybe the IRS and the Department of Treasury, they start wrapping up Trump's stuff. They start, go get the binders. All right, go get them. Packing them all up. Which is why this is accelerating. In fact, the legislative calendar weighs in favor of more deliberation, not less. Just last week, Americans voted to elect a new House and Senate. That new Congress is going to convene on January 3rd. Meanwhile, the old Congress only has a few days left on its legislative calendar. Though a few days is enough time to improperly expose these most sensitive documents of its chief political rival, it's not enough time to properly study, draft, debate, or even pass legislation. As the D.C. Circuit Court once held in similar circumstances, granting a stay would have the benefit, meaning stopping the government from transferring the taxes, would have the benefit of permitting the new House, the Republican House, an opportunity to express their views on the merits of the lawsuit. And guess what their opinion's going to be on this? Probably not all that interested. Only that result reflects, quote, the special solitude that this court gives certiorari petitions from former presidents. And only that result honors every branch's duty to avoid these kinds of constitutional classes whenever possible. We're not supposed to be partisan political hacks in our roles as official government people. You're supposed to do your job as a congressperson, but now it's sort of become part of your job is to protect democracy. And because very conveniently that includes eviscerating your political enemies, you now get the benefit of both things smashed into one. Trump's team says this court should enter a stay. They have some argument. They say this court should stay the lower court's mandate of transferring the records. And then it should set a schedule for further briefing. right? So we're not even talking about the full issue yet. We're just talking about the stay. Whether the DC Circuit Court, whether the stay should stay in place while this continues on. This court took the same course in a different case under indistinguishable circumstances. Because think about it the other way, right? The judge could say, well, and I guess you can start the transfer process and you can brief me while it's all ongoing. But of course, then it might become moot. And so they're arguing that this isn't even the full brief yet. The equities are lopsided in favor of a stay, and the stay is the only way to preserve this court's ability to review the important questions. Because if there isn't a stay, if this court lifts the stay, the records are going to go out to the committee, and then this whole thing's going to be moot. This court granted a stay in another case, they argue. To resist a stay pending certiorari, the House pressed the same arguments in a prior case that they pressed here. Yet in the Mazars case, the court granted a stay. It should do it here too. Though Mazars was decided before Donald Trump left office, the committee's demand for his tax information was issued while he was in office. And it was continuously pursued. It was evaluated under the Mazars test because it does implicate separation of powers. So they're arguing just because Trump left doesn't mean that you should change. Don't change anything. Use the same test and apply it and dump this case just like you did the last one. How the DC Circuit decided this case thus has sweeping implications for both former presidents and sitting presidents. There's no change. This case presents no issues less weighty than the other cases. This concerns congressional demand for Trump's personal information, and it implicates separation of powers. All parties agree the committee's request implicates separation of powers because there is an inter-branch conflict. Just as in prior cases that we had issues with Trump's private papers, this is now bringing the president's papers and the judiciary, quote, into uncharted territory, asking the court to really step in here and settle this. Whether and how the considerations apply here is a question of first impression, and it's very foundational to our entire constitutional structure. The government ignores that the executive branch previously found the same request unconstitutional, right? Trump's people, when they were sort of dealing with these requests, they said, oh no, it's unconstitutional. But as soon as Biden took over, his attorney decided it was perfectly reasonable to do this. Trump's team says the equities, sort of what's fair, it balances a stay, meaning the document should not be transferred. President Trump faces the same form of irreparable harm. The mooting of the case. If the documents are public, there's nothing else to talk about. The government even acknowledges that. The arguments they make were all raised, all rejected in the prior case. Instead of crediting these concerns, the court granted our stay and reversed 9-0. So the court should do the same here. Careful deliberation, not haste, is the watchword that we think is appropriate. And therefore, grant the stay so that we can have a full briefing and full deliberation when you grant certiorari. The equities overwhelmingly favor a stay, they can continue. The government acknowledges that Trump will have irreparable harm. They're correct. Without a stay, his legal claims become moot, and all of the confidential information in the taxes will be disclosed. Nor does the committee contest that the equities strongly favor intervention. In just over a single page at the back of its brief, the committee suggests granting the application would, quote, seriously harm Congress. It claims that the committee would have little or no time to complete their work during this Congress. They're saying, we are running out of time. We got to get this thing done. We're going to be out of power soon. It's quickly approaching. But Trump's people respond. They say, look, okay, this Congress already lacks enough time to start the supposed legislative work, right? They're not going to get it done before they're out there. They've got 17 days left in their final session, and then it's over. It's inconceivable that Congress is going to suddenly wake up and adequately analyze the voluminous sets of documents that are Trump's taxes, that they're going to, hold hearings, propose new legislation, and then vote on it in 17 days. You kidding me? In its lone paragraph suggesting harm to the Congress, the committee has nothing to say about this. And secondly, the equities favor a brief delay so that the new Congress can actually consider the matter. We don't want these old Congress people who aren't even going to be in charge anymore to continue on with this. Let's let the new people who just got elected in. All agree that no amount of delay would moot this and that it could carry over to the next Congress. The balance is changing soon. And third, any urgency of the government that they're alleging, they created it themselves. We've told you that this case has already been stayed for over 1,100 days across 2 Congresses, and that any prejudice that the committee suffers, Congress has been waiting for years for this, and so anything that they have suffered is their own self-inflicted harm. Instead, the supposed harms that Congress is facing from delay, they're not irreparable at all. Right? If they really want to pass legislation, well, they can investigate this whenever they want. They don't need to do it right now in this Congress immediately. And so therefore, that's not a good enough reason to deny the stay and allow the documents to be exposed, mooting the entire case. If anything, they are reasons to simply treat this application as a certiorari petition and set an expedited schedule for briefing on the merits. That course would allow for the efficient resolution of this case, allow the new Congress to weigh in without giving short shrift to these serious legal issues. Now, there's a footnote here. We see a little asterisk, which is curious. And they have that noted here for us here. They say, strangely, the committee suggests that this court should treat the stay application as a certiorari and then deny it. But while quickly granting certiorari, okay, so that's some technical stuff. We'll skip over that. Now, the argument from Trump's team says, also, court, by the way, you should grant the stay because we're probably going to win on in the end anyways. The government downplays the importance of this case. The committee cast this dispute as a mere misapplication of the law. But even if that was right, some misapplications of the law do warrant the Supreme Court's review. The government says the D.C. Circuit Court applied the Mazars test, the same one that would govern a sitting president, but this introduces new problems. They say this conclusion is not worthy of consideration. They say the committee misunderstands the Mazars case and that the dispute implicates more than what was implicated in Mazars. It concerns what the court can look at and the differential levels of review. Now, when addressing the different considerations in Mazars, they go through sort of the different elements. They say the government cannot hide behind the generic principle that Congress is allowed to go up some blind alleys into non-productive enterprises. They can't go on fishing expeditions. They can't make up a reason to pull you over. Your license plate lights out. You made a wide right turn. You stopped in the crosswalk. And then charge you with, serious drug crimes and investigate you with a full body cavity search, right? It's not what they're allowed to do because it becomes partisan and because it becomes exploitable. When it comes to President, Trump's lawyers say congressional demands must be no broader than reasonably necessary to support Congress's legislative objectives. And the United States at one point even agreed with that. Evidence must include whether they were properly searching for evidence or whether they were just going after purely private citizens. The prior test wanted to heighten the test, saying that the government can only act when they've got legitimate legislative purpose. They can't drop below that standard. And so Trump's lawyers write in conclusion, they say, this court should order that the mandate of the D.C. Circuit, which is now stayed pending further order of this court, is further stayed pending the filing and the disposition of this case. Right, so it's very preliminary here. They want, and actually, this gives Trump and his team more time. Right, consider this a stay, and then set a whole nother deadline and allow us to file our petition for a writ of certiorari. 2 weeks from now. And guess what? That eats into those 17 days. This court could also construe this application as a petition for certiorari and grant review, and that would sort of accelerate things. Right, so they would sort of prefer the first option to the second option, but signed off on by Thomas McCarthy, Patrick Strawbridge, both representing Donald Trump to the United States Supreme Court. And that wraps up the filing. So you can see we have Trump's original application, which was filed back in October. Then we've got the government's response from the United States. We've got the committee from the Ways and Means. And then we have Trump's reply. And we'll start to see more from the United States Supreme Court. They will give us some deadlines and we'll learn more from them. But we've also got some updates on some other lawsuits that Trump is involved in because, of course, There are a lot of them. Trump lawyer Alina Abba gives us an update on other litigation that Trump is facing around the country, and she says that they are winning.
Against the president's former personal attorney and the former mayor of New York. That was a really big deal. What was your take on that?
That was such a big deal. Oh, that was a big deal. And, we've spoken about this. It just tells you how, they went in, they seized. Does it sound like something we know?
Yeah.
They go into his house, they take things, and they traumatize this person. They try and ruin his career. They're not doing it. And he's resilient as well. And you know what? It was all for nothing. They are really just constantly eating their words. And their behavior is being noticed. And I'm really glad that there are judges that are noticing it and that are saying we're not going to allow this anymore. I mean, between Michael Cohen, the Trump family won against Mary Trump last night, and now Rudy's win, I think it's a great sign for things to come. And I think it's a great night to do this, for many reasons.
Alina Abba, Trump's lawyer, who is communicating that they are winning big time. They are having a tremendous series of victories. And she went through the litany. Michael Cohen's having a tough time. Alex Vindman's having a tough time. Rudy Giuliani was exonerated. No criminal charges for him. And they're doing pretty good. In fact, so good that they're going out and announcing Trump's running for president again, whether you like it or not, America. It's coming, and it's coming hard. And Alina Abba is there celebrating the victories. All right, so we've got some more to get to. And of course, we have to check in with the turtle, Mitch. After Donald Trump made his announcement, he's running for president again. A lot of people want to know what the Republican GOP leaders have to say about it. We don't hear too much from Mitch McConnell, but here's his reaction to the announcement.
Mr. Leader, can you respond to former President Trump announcing that he plans to run for re-election? And do you believe that will help or hinder your chances in the Georgia runoff?
The way I'm going to go into this presidential primary season is to stay out of it. I don't have a dog in that fight. I think it's going to be a highly contested nomination fight with other candidates entering, and it's all going to be quite good for you all to cover. How
do you think it will impact your runoff in Georgia? Do you want former President Trump to come to Georgia?
We're going to do everything we can to get Herschel Walker elected. We can't pretty well determine who's going to come in, and we'll see how that develops.
So he's being pretty neutral here. Doesn't have a dog in the fight, not one way or the other. Is just kind of okay letting it unfold. And I really actually think that's the right answer. A lot of politicians are going to be encouraged to pick sides and sort of incentivize making a hard decision. And that is probably going to lead to more division. And so he's going to play mum, for the foreseeable future, as we would expect from the turtle. But all right, so that's Cocaine Mitch, who's out there, who's, sometimes he doesn't seem like he's on that much cocaine if we take a look at it. But that is the update on the Donald Trump taxes. Of course, the House Ways and Means Committee really, really wants them. And we'll see more updates from the U.S. Supreme Court. And when those documents hit the docket, we will cover them here. Thank you for joining us wherever you are watching this. Thank you for liking this video. We'll see you on the next one.